Thanks, Tracy Hunt. Always learn a lot from Tracy and appreciate his in-depth studies of truth and knowledge. So thank you, Tracy. I'd like to introduce you guys to a really special guest we've had here at RCAF USA before. Jaden wants me to read all this stuff off, and I don't feel like it's very personable because I didn't write it, but I'm gonna skip it. Margaret Byfield, Executive Director of the American Stewards of Liberty, one of the most knowledgeable people on property rights that I know, because her and her family endured one of the longest and most notable cases of property rights infringements in American history. Her and her husband, Dan Byfield, created the American Stewards of Liberty. They are very active on the ground level of property rights, policy formation in Washington, D.C., on the state and national level. She is a true treasure and has become a great mentor for me. She led our fight against natural asset companies and was very instrumental in helping me write that article that went viral. And I appreciate her so much. She's somebody I look up to, her and Dan, both great family people, great American patriots. Please welcome Margaret Byfield back to RCAF USA.
Thank you. Appreciate it. That was so much better than the written bio. Thank you, Shad. So how I first met Shad, I think it was right after 30 by 30 had come out. So Biden had signed the executive order, and we had dug in. We were expecting it. So we had a county that passed a resolution, Garfield County, Colorado, in 3 weeks, and we started getting this out across the West. And I was in Nebraska for other reasons with the county, working on a different issue, and that commissioner said, "We need to let people about this. Let's just organize a little public meeting in Valentine, Nebraska," which is very remote. I'm sure you guys know it, and let's start letting them know about this 30 by 30 agenda. So it was really the first meeting we'd done on it. We had like 350 people show up for this meeting on 30 by 30, and it created a firestorm. Well, out of that, somebody from RCAF was there, called Shad and said, "Who's this lady from Texas?" And Shad says, "I don't know, and I don't know why I don't know her." So that's how we connected. And it's been great. It's been great to work with Shad and with RCAF, even before that. But it's been great to work with all of you. One of the things that I really appreciate is, if you remember, during that time, right after Biden was elected, and January 6th had happened, and conservatives really had their head undercover. Nobody was really wanting to step out in front because none of us knew whose head was going to get taken off, right? You guys remember that. And so that's when 30 by 30 was launched, and we just needed people to step out and be public and oppose this. And the first organization that came alongside American Stewards of Liberty in the 30 by 30 fight was RCAF. And I'll always appreciate the support you guys gave us and the help you gave us in that fight. It was indispensable to what then led to the natural capital companies fight that we ended up getting into as well. But I want to jump into this. Some of you are familiar with my background, some are not, but just to give you a real brief background, I was raised on a ranch in Nevada, and we purchased Pine Creek Ranch in 1978, and so it's in Nevada, which is 87% federally owned, which means our ranch had very little private property and a lot of federal. So it was 1,100 square miles. Only 7,000 acres of that was actually private, but we owned all the water on all of that. So the first thing that happened when we purchased the ranch, the Forest Service filed an application over all our water rights. And then they proceeded to use the grazing regulations, of course, to run us out of business, which they succeeded in eventually. We fought them for 13 years on the ground. And then in 1991, we filed the first federal lands grazing takings case, Hage versus United States. And then we fought that for 27 years in the federal courts. We won that at the U.S. Federal Court of Claims. And we were actually awarded $14.4 million in compensation for that. But then it was overturned at the U.S. District Court in D.C. And so at the end of the day, we were never compensated. We lost the takings case, and ultimately we lost the ranch. But that's really the atmosphere that I grew up in, which was having a very personal understanding of the power of the federal agencies over people when they own the land. And also got a very close introduction into the environmental movement and how they operate, because that was the force that was operating against us. But that has led to a lifelong passion of protecting property rights, which is what our organization does. And I think it's, at first going through that, you think, why is this happening to our family? But coming out of it, you can always turn something bad into good. And I think coming out of it, just having that experience is one of the reasons why I think we were able to see what the natural asset companies was all about, and some of these agendas, and get people alerted. And so I feel like a little bit like Joseph, that what man meant for evil, God meant for good. And that's always been our passion and our drive at American Stewards of Liberty. But most importantly, there's a message that I always like to drive home, even when I'm in audiences like you that I know already understand this. But what is at the core of America, what makes America unique, is that we are a nation that can own the property. That's what's so unique from other nations. That's what our founders, that's how they distinguished us from other governments. We can talk about our Bill of Rights and our Constitution, and it's great. And you ask some people, I read Vivek Ramaswamy's book not too long ago, and he said the most important right in our Bill of Rights is the Second Amendment. And a lot of people think that, and it's not that that's not an important right, it's that you have to understand it's a property right. The most important right that we as American citizens have is our property right, because that's what defends all other rights. And then the practical way that our founders established that we the people would always control our government and have the opportunities to live the American dream, become as prosperous and as inventive and ingenious as we possibly could be, was that we would own the land and not the federal government. So property is so important, and of course you guys know the rest of the story. The East is basically privatized, the West is basically federalized. And that's when politics changed in Washington, D.C., and the progressive agenda came forward, and the conservation movement was funded by the robber barons to stamp out the competition of the West. And that's how we get into the situation where we are today, which is 40% of America is owned by government now, 40%. So but that's the battle, that's the battleground. And we're in the middle of this where we own a significant amount of that private property as producers, cattle producers. And the environmentalists do not want us to have that. And the environmentalists have control of the public narrative. They have their literature in the schools. And so they are indoctrinating the next generation, and they're way ahead of us on this. And so this is a much bigger agenda than any of us in this room, and I know through this whole conference you've been hearing that. But I want you to keep that in mind, that focus in mind, and that is our focus at American Stewards of Liberty. And part of what we're really focused on now, which we've always been, is trying to reach that next generation and trying to inform the public, develop that educated citizenry that is working against us today. And so a lot of the presentations that I do are not before agriculture organizations. They're actually in urban areas. And I'll tell you, I'm always amazed at how many of those people get it when they start understanding the conservation movement. So I feel like we're making inroads. But I want to focus a little bit more on the practical fight before us right now. And now that we have a new administration, we have both the need to roll back the damage that the Biden administration did and to advance our agenda. This is what sometimes we, as conservatives, don't think about. Conservatives are people who, by their nature, mind their own business, right? We mind our own business. And so it's hard for us sometimes to think about getting very involved in these issues unless they're coming to us and attacking us. But we have to be proactive right now. We have to be pushing our agenda. We need to be thinking in terms of rolling back the environmental agenda. And so things like, instead of adding more lands to the federal inventory, we need to be thinking about reducing lands to the federal inventory. And that's the mindset we need to be fighting with. I have been spending a lot of time in Washington, D.C. Over the past couple of years and have developed some great relationships. And what I will tell you about the members back there, we have a lot of members back there that think like we do. But we've got to support them. And so that's one of the things that we do focus on, is making sure our presence is back there. We're back there fairly frequently so that when they see us, they think property rights with everything else coming at them. And we keep our issues in front of them, and we become a resource to them, and we become a help to them to do their job more effectively. So I'm going to focus in on, we have a list, I think, of about 20 key items that we're tracking and we are working to roll back. But I want to focus on just a few here today that we're going to touch on, because they're moving targets right now, and it's where we have the opportunity. And those of you who know us well, you know we fight from a biblical perspective. So where those doors open, we walk through. And that's the way we view these issues that we're working on. So we have two key things we have to do. We have to rescind the 30 by 30 agenda. And that has been entrenched in so many different ways over the last 4 years. We have to rescind the Sustains Act. You guys all know about that act. We have an opportunity to amend or defund the Endangered Species Act. And we have the opportunity to reduce the federal land inventory. And we also have an opportunity to sunset conservation easements. And I'm going to drill into each one of these a little bit and tell you kind of where we are. But let me first recap for all of you who don't remember the 30 by 35. I don't know how you guys couldn't. But this was the agenda to permanently protect 30% of our lands and oceans by 2030. And Biden implemented it 6 days into his administration. President Trump revoked the policy on the first day of his presidency. So the policy is gone. That doesn't mean everything they put in place is gone. And that's what we have to start digging out, and that's the bigger job in front of us. One of these, to give you an illustration of how they did this, they did it in ways like the BLM conservation rule, which I'm sure you all are pretty familiar with. The expansion of national monuments. There's a number of different ways that they did this. The conservation programs through the USDA, pouring tons and tons, billions of dollars into those conservation programs that landowners use, like EQIP, CRP, the conservation stewardship, the agriculture conservation easements. They went from funding those programs at a level of about $400 billion a year, or $1 million, to like 10.5 is the total number that they still have to spend on those. They poured a ton of money into these programs that wasn't there before. We heard Alex touch on last night, their goal has been to get us hooked through money. And those conservation programs do it. And what people don't understand about those conservation programs is it creates a federal nexus to their private land, which then triggers other federal laws that otherwise could not touch that private landowner. And that's the string that we are going to have to be very concerned about, that will be pulled at some point in the next Democratic administration. So that's something I just want to touch on briefly. But let me talk about Muleshoe a little bit. So this is a really good example of how they implemented 30 by 30 and what we have to do to roll these things back. So the Muleshoe land grab is in Texas and New Mexico. And The Muleshoe National Wildlife Refuge, well, the National Wildlife Refuge Agency first released a new set of policies which gave themselves the authority to create land protection areas around refuges and then decide what private land they were going to acquire to expand the refuge. So they gave themselves that authority. Congress didn't give it to them. They assumed it through their policies. And then they released the Muleshoe land grab, a 6,440 acre refuge. They put a 7 million acre acquisition area around it. And out of that, they plan to acquire 700,000 acres of private land that they plan to acquire either outright or through conservation easements. And so let me share with you one of the things that is very concerning, and I don't know how much if you guys have ever been confronted with this before, but one of the stories that I've started to tell about our case is what happened actually after we filed the case, because this kind of explains what we see is coming with these kind of projects. So when we filed our takings case in 1991, shortly thereafter, we were already in the state water adjudication case, and then 4 months after we filed our case, the Forest Service filed 2 federal criminal charges against my dad. He lost the jury trial, and then he was under house arrest for about 6 months. But so at one point we had 3 cases that we were involved in. And it was about that time that we were contacted, Dad was contacted by a mining company. And they said, we want to buy your ranch. And so Dad says, well, you know, I'm not sure what you want to buy. We don't even know who owns this thing yet. You know, it's in court. My water rights are contested. Everything's contested. So I don't even know what I could sell you right now. But he talked to him because he wanted to know what's the agenda here. And it turned out that the mine needed a federal permit to open their mine. So they were given a list of properties that if they acquired, if they purchased, and then turned over back to the federal government, they could get their permit. So Dad said, okay, so what's going to happen to the takings case? And they said, oh, well, that goes away. So I said, well, you're not buying a ranch today. So that's the agenda. If you look at this Muleshoe area, the lower part of this is the Midland, Odessa, rich oil fields, where most of actually a large portion of the nation's oil and gas comes from right today. They listed, before doing all this, they listed the dune sagebrush lizard and lesser prairie chicken. So now there is a need for companies that need a drilling permit to need to mitigate. And now they have a list of properties that they know they want to acquire for the Muleshoe expansion area, and easy targets, right? You guys can see how this can all play out. That's one of the things that we think it was driving this particular plan. But I want to go ahead and, how do I play this? Just hit play? I want to go ahead and show you that some of the things that we are doing at American Stewards of Liberty is we're trying to elevate our story in the general public. And so we've started to produce some short films. And this is the one we did on Muleshoe.
Madam Speaker, I rise to offer an amendment to defund the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services plan to expand the Muleshoe Wildlife Refuge by an unprecedented 1,000%. A 6,400 acre wildlife refuge, and they want to expand it to 700,000 acres.
A secret government plot to seize vast lands for the Muleshoe Nature Reserve threatens to destroy farmers, ranchers, and communities whose way of life hangs in the balance. When Monty Edwards first heard whispers of a plan to expand the Muleshoe National Wildlife Refuge, he dismissed it. A respected real estate broker and lifelong resident of Lamb County, Monty knows the land and the people here better than most. So when he couldn't find a single neighbor, official, or rancher who knew anything about it, his concern turned to alarm.
It was just by chance. In 1 week period, I had 2 previous clients and acquaintances, friends, that contacted me asking me questions. They kept bringing up this plan. They kept talking about something to do with the wildlife refuge, and the first person that mentioned it, I kind of brushed it off because I said, I'm not sure what you're talking about. So I decided after I talked to these guys and I downloaded the plan myself, and the thing that I can say about everybody that I started talking to about the plan is nobody knew about it. I know pretty much everything that's going on around here. Being in the real estate business, having lived here my entire life. So when you start asking me questions and I don't know anything about it, and then I start asking people that know stuff and they don't know anything about it, it caused me, it probably was one of the biggest red flags that I saw. None of the elected officials to my knowledge that I spoke with did. And I still remember being kind of shocked by that.
The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service wants to expand the Muleshoe Refuge from 6,500 acres to a staggering 700,000 acres. They say it's voluntary, aimed at protecting birds like the sandhill crane, but here in the cotton towns and ranch land of West Texas, it feels more like something else. Scott Harrell, superintendent of Sudan ISD, knows what's at stake.
Of the 700,000 acres that they're talking about in this Muleshoe wildlife expansion, Sudan ISD is directly right in the middle of those acres.
The district spans 600 square miles and serves about 450 students. It relies on taxes from private land, but federal land pays no property tax.
If we reduce farming and ranching in this district, we definitely reduce the core of the community and the core of this district. If a lot of this land goes away and our tax base goes away, and if the school goes away, odds are really good that the town goes away.
For cotton farmer Brian Baker, the issue is just as urgent.
This land grab is so massive. It's taking in a whole bunch of really good farmland. When we sell that cotton, we're selling it as a clothing, as an oil, cow feed. So it actually spreads out even further once it leaves here. All that kind of comes back to the community. And if we take out farms out of that area, then we're going to lose a big portion of that income.
With American Stewards of Liberty, local leaders sparked a massive community meeting to confront the Muleshoe expansion crisis.
We never knew anything about it until Monty contacted me. I've never seen anything the government does where they come in and get a little control. They always seem like they get more control and more control. And to me, we're getting along pretty good out here without it.
The expansion is described as voluntary, but once the neighbors opt in, those who resist are surrounded.
Don't put me in a position where I feel like I'm forced to have to give up my family farm.
Well, everybody that keeps telling me that it's a voluntary plan acts like that's supposed to make me feel better. But the problem with voluntary plans is if you're setting a plan in place that has all of these pieces of it that point people to the choice to make this voluntary choice, it's not really voluntary.
Monty remembers what happened in the 1980s when a similar program gutted small towns like Sudan.
And one of the best examples that I can think of is what we saw happen in the 80s in our part of the country with a totally voluntary plan, and that was called Conservation Reserve Program. And I remember Sudan, the town I'm from, when I was a kid, that there was a business in nearly every building on Main Street. By the late 80s, there was a handful of businesses in the community. And what I'm telling you happened here happened everywhere. Every one of the little communities, as we saw people put their land into these conservation programs, and I don't think it's by total coincidence that we're in a similar situation today, and this is when they began to implement this plan.
Residents here don't oppose conservation, they live it. They raise cattle, manage fields, prevent fires. The land is productive and cared for.
These guys are great stewards of the land because it's a business where you make an investment in a cow herd that you want to make sure you have future pasture for them, and you want to maximize your production, so it's in your best interest to be a better steward of the ground than letting it just sit and desiccate.
Land in West Texas isn't just dirt, it's legacy, liberty, and life, and the people of Muleshoe aren't ready to give it up.
We all love what we do out here. This is home, and we don't want to have to leave.
So that's a representation of what's been going on all across the country for the last 3-4 years. This is what we need to dig out and roll back. So we have been told from pretty high level at Department of Interior that this muleshoe plan is going away, which is great. Yeah. But we are not going to be taking our foot off the gas on this, because Jody Arrington, Representative Arrington, has a bill filed to stop this plan permanently. Because as he says, all we need, we can make it go away today. It'll be back in 3 or 4 years with another administration. We have to cut the head off of the plan, is really the strategy. So if you follow our work, hopefully soon you will hear an announcement that this has been rescinded. But you will also hear us saying, and we need to get Arrington's bill passed. So we have a twofold job in front of us. We're going to accept the victory, and then we're going to take the head off on this one. That's our strategy. So let me switch over to natural asset companies. I do want to touch on this one a little bit. You guys were involved in the fight. Shad was very involved in the fight with us on this. This was the effort by Wall Street and a group called Intrinsic Exchange Group to monetize our natural resources. They were creating investment firms which would have created as a new asset things like pollination, photosynthesis, all these other natural processes. The health benefits from being in open air was also one of these assets that they were creating that could be enrolled in their investment companies and then people could profit off of. Well, this was very, very dangerous for a number of reasons. First, there's a reason that things like pollination, these natural processes, are not property. There's a very simple way to understand what is property. It's something you can contain and you can exclude others from. How do you exclude people from breathing clean air, right? You can't. This isn't property. This is why you can go through thousands of years of philosophical debate on property, and you never see this ever considered as property because it's not real property. But what it did create was a tool to control the land where these natural processes were enrolled in these companies. Then they would be able, these people would be able to control the actual land that was enrolled. So what could be enrolled in these? It said very clearly our national parks. All our federal lands could have been enrolled in these companies for private investors to profit off of these natural processes. It also said that, or one of the things that we knew could be enrolled were conservation easements. So if somebody had a conservation easement on their land, unless their contract specifically said they could not profit off of those ecosystem services, unless there was a provision in their contract that says they couldn't, those conservation easements could have been enrolled in these natural capital accounts. It also gave the investors the management authority over the assets. So now you have to ask who would be managing our national parks that were enrolled in this, the National Park Service or the investors like BlackRock, Bill Gates, George Soros? That's who would be managing these lands. And then the other thing it did that really frightened a lot of people who aren't typically involved in our issues is that it invited foreign investors to invest in these companies, which meant now we could have China, Iran, all of our enemies investing in these companies, having management authority over this property. It was very frightening. Fortunately, and I won't go into the whole battle, but we had a very, very short window to kill this, to get people alerted to what it was and kill it, and we're able to get it pushed back and enough light exposed on it that on January 17th of 2024, the New York Stock Exchange withdrew their application for these companies because of the heat. So that was an incredible victory. I did a number of podcasts during that time, and one of the individuals that I went on his show, his name is Bill Walton. He has a huge financial background, and he said He said, you know, this was the equivalent of China being able to take over our country without even a fight if this had gone through. And he was exactly right. So I can't tell you how critical it was that this was stopped. But we still have residual effect. Now, first off, the concept behind the natural asset companies was also tandem being developed in the White House. The White House under Biden was working to put on the federal balance sheet a new line called natural capital accounts, where they were basically going to do the same thing. Monetize all of these natural processes, put them on the federal balance sheet. The first individual back in DC that I really talked to about this was Senator Ricketts out of Nebraska. And his response was, well, they need to increase the federal debt, so they have to increase their assets. They need the debt to be risen, so they need to increase their assets. So that's what he was thinking that they were doing, and I think he was spot on. The second part, of course, is control. If they can track, and we heard Alex talking about this, tracking, you know, all of our carbon footprint and all of these things. If you remember over the last 3-4 years in ag, a lot more data was collected on you, correct? It was a data gathering period, working up to a time when they would have the data in order to put it on the federal balance sheet. Now, so this also, this White House strategy was killed on day one of the Trump presidency, which is fantastic. So that's a good breath of air, but it will be coming back. And I'm going to show you something that was in this, an outgrowth of this that you guys may or may not be aware of. We've been talking about it quite a bit, but if you haven't followed our work, you may not be aware of this. So they released this national strategy, and then 18 months later, they came out with the results of their test pilot accounts. Basically, it was their process of figuring out how do we quantify these things and actually get them on the federal balance sheet. So they had 4 accounts that they were tracking. One was land, water, air, and these ecosystem services, environmental services, which is where the natural processes would be quantified. So I was really tracking that, but what really stuck out was in their news release, they say right in the front, as in relation to the land pilot test account, they said private land in the contiguous 48 states was valued at $32 trillion, equivalent to roughly 30% of the net wealth already measured in U.S. accounts. Accounting for natural assets like land on our nation's balance sheet is critical. Omitting them would dramatically underestimate U.S. wealth. Okay, here's what I took note of. Number one, they weren't talking about the federal land that they owned and how much that was valued. They were talking about our private land. And number two, when they say accounting for the natural assets like land, they didn't say federal land. They said land. They meant all land. They were planning to put every bit of your private property on the federal balance sheet as a U.S. asset that they could collateralize. Now, they link a document in here, which was kind of their background on how they got to this analysis. And in that, the summary of that says, our results underscore the potential importance of private land as a quantitatively significant asset on our national balance sheet. So in the linked document that they relied on, their study, they just come out and say, we are putting your private property on the federal balance sheet as our collateral, as a U.S. asset. Now in America, isn't the individual sovereign? Isn't this what we fought? Isn't this how we work to not be like the European nations where the crown owns all the land or the government owns all the land? We the people own the land. But this is the bullet we dodged when Trump was elected, because they had this all in place. And I think if Harris had been elected, they had it all in place, and we would be singing a completely different song today. Life for us would be very different. But remember, this can come back in less than 4 years now. All we need is one Democratic administration. They have everything in place. So these are the kind of things that we have to be aware of, and we have to be working to eliminate now. So there's things like Julie Ock here in South Dakota had introduced a bill that would not allow the creation of natural asset companies in South Dakota. You guys need to get that passed. This is going to have to be a state-by-state fight. And for all of you who are in other states, you need to do things like that. You need to be very vigilant about getting those kind of proposals passed in your state so that at the very least you can protect your state and your property. But that is something that we have to take this seriously. Now, one of the ways that this is manifested also is in the Sustains Act, which I know RCAF is very familiar with. So one of the things that it does is it actually, in these conservation programs, it allows the public-private partnership now so that private entities can contribute funds to these federal conservation programs like CRP, conservation stewardship, not CRP, EQIP, agriculture conservation easements, right? So now you could have, I don't know, big corporation putting in money to help you put conservation stewardship program on your property. The way that the law is written is that once this occurs, then that private entity prescribes, is the word used in the statute, prescribes to the secretary how much of those ecosystem services they now own on your land. And then the secretary notices the landowner about the division of the ecosystem services, who owns what on your land. So a couple things that really stand out about this is, number one, they don't go to you first. You don't have a say in that, on how much, or even permission, whether you're going to allow somebody to own the ecosystem services on your property. That's not your decision. The second thing is that there's no clarity on whether it's retroactive. So it doesn't say for all the programs moving forward. There's no clarity on whether or not it's retroactive. So can an individual help fund an existing conservation stewardship program right today that a landowner got into, thinking in full disclosure this was going to be a safe program to get into, and now have a private company owning part of the ecosystem services on their land, therefore partly have some control over that land. So these are some of the things that we have identified, and there's two things that we're working on. Number one, everyone in this room has to support Representative Harriet Hagman's bill, which I'm hoping you'll hear from later today, that would repeal this. And she has just gone in and she's done an outright, let's get rid of this, repeal this. That is a heavy lift, and that's one of the reasons we really, really have to help her get this. So go home to your representative, get them to co-sign on this bill. We've got to generate some momentum behind that effort of hers, which she is leading in Congress. The second thing is Secretary Rollins has the ability to write a rule on how the Sustains Act will be developed. And from my read of the law, the Secretary is given a lot of discretion as to how this rule can be written. So one of the things that we're recommending is that as this rule is developed, she do things like require prior notice to the landowner, require consent by the landowner. And there's a number of different things that I think she could do in a rule that would then protect the landowner from the real harmful parts of this. So consent to have a private entity being able to contribute to funds and have control of your property. That seems kind of common sense, right? So anyway, we're going to be working on those kind of things behind the scenes, and hopefully we'll be making some good progress. And of course, we will take all the help and partnership with you guys that we can on that. But those are two key things that I wanted to point out that are high level that we need to get rescinded. So now let's talk about how we take advantage of our opportunities. As I said earlier, we have not only the job of rolling back all the damage, but now we have an opportunity to actually advance our agenda. So one of the things that when we started this year, I honestly was not on my radar and thinking that this is what we were going to be focused on at American Stewards this year. But it's an opportunity that came up to actually amend the Endangered Species Act. And the reason that we felt this would be a very, very good time to do this is because of the 2 subcommittee chairmanships that were named in early January that has oversight now over the Endangered Species Act. On the House side, the subcommittee chair is Harriet Hagman. Yep. On the, yeah. And on the Senate side is Senator Pete Ricketts from Nebraska. Now, Senator Ricketts was our strongest state leader opposing 30 by 30. He was the first to put a letter into the SEC on the natural asset companies to tell them, wait a minute, when they were trying to get the natural capital companies going forward. He has been a very, very good advocate and defender of property rights. And so when I found out the subcommittee chairmanships, I contacted both of them and said, can we work with you on the Endangered Species Act? And they both said yes. So and of course we have the trifecta. So this is, we've been tracking the ESA for over 30 years. We've seen all the bills that have come forward. We remember Pombo's bill, I think, which was repeal and replace the ESA. And then there was Kempthorne's bill to modernize the ESA. And there's been a lot of attempts to change the Endangered Species Act and not a lot of really good momentum in that direction. But because we have the trifecta, because of our leaders in the leadership positions that they are, we think this is our opportunity to really move something. Additionally, the chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee, Bruce Westerman, had filed a bill last year to modernize the ESA. And we weren't really excited about it largely because it handled a lot of the downstream issues with the Endangered Species Act. So it handles the things like what happens after a species is listed. Well, they do some really good things that improve the 4D rule and critical habitat and mitigation and all these things that are really important for permitting and will help get permitting through faster. But our assessment is it's going to make it easier for the attorneys to win their cases, which is good. That doesn't help our members. Our members are the small landowners that can't afford the $1,000 attorney per hour to fight these things like a big corporation can. And so that was our problem with the bill. Not that it wasn't a good bill, but that it didn't help the small landowner. It didn't help people like you in this room. And so we weren't really excited about it, but he refiled the bill again this year, and that is our vehicle to work with. And so what we decided to do is develop some amendments to his bill. So we work with a really good attorney in Arizona. I've been working with him for years. He's the only attorney that I know of that has won an ESA case at the Supreme Court in a case when he was representing home builders. So reached out to him. He developed 6 amendments that could be added to Westerman's bill, and that would attack the key problem, which is species are getting listed that shouldn't be on the list to begin with. That's the biggest problem. And we figure if we can keep from species being on the list who shouldn't be there, it handles so many of those downstream issues that the rest of the bill is dealing with. So that was our focus. So we developed the amendments, and when we went in and talked with Harriet about them and showed them to her, her response was, okay, I want every one of these, and I need 2 more. And so we had things in there where you get rid of distinct population segments, and you define some terms very simply so that it gets rid of all of the consultations and some other things going on. And she wanted to add to that a way to get rid of subspecies designations, and then also a delisting path, a path to get species off the list. So we went back to Norm. He drafted us 2 more amendments, and she liked them. And so those are so we have a total actually of 7 amendments that we are pushing to get put into this bill. And I've met face-to-face with every subcommittee chairman on these amendments. They like them, they want them. And we think we have a pretty good shot at getting them in the manager's amendment that will be coming up when this bill is heard in the committee and then marked up. So feel pretty good that we have Congress pretty well, or the House Resources Committee pretty well positioned to get these amendments into the bill. And I'm going to DC next week, and we've already met with three-fourths of the House Republicans on that committee, and we're going to be checking off the rest of those this week to make sure that they're aware. But this is something we're pushing really hard. Our plan is, if we can get our amendments into Westerman's bill and get it passed out of the House Natural Resources Committee, then it'll go to the full House. And then that's where we have to really do our work to get all of the members supporting this. The biggest lift is going to come on the Senate side because we have to get 61 votes. But all those things we're going to face as we get there. I will say, behind the scenes, we are working on a pretty stout PR campaign that, if we can get it to happen, is going to be major. In other words, we're thinking the long game and of how to change Americans' minds on how they understand the Endangered Species Act and get them educated. So stay tuned for all that. But the first part, the thing that you guys can really help us with right now, is these ESA amendments. First goal is to get them into the House Natural Resource Bill. Hopefully we will see a draft of that bill before the markup. And if we do, then we're going to look at what pieces of ours did not make it in and find some members who will make those amendments in the House Resources Committee markup. So when all of that starts happening, it's going to develop pretty quickly, and we will be sending our alerts out, and they will be things like, please contact your congressman and ask him to support X amendment or things like that. So you guys could be very helpful to us. If you make sure you're signed up for our Liberty Matters, it's free. That's our email system, and we will keep you plugged into this fight. And if you can, if there's a moment you can pick up the phone and help us by pushing these, it would be very, very helpful to us. So that's the one fight. Yeah, those are the 7 amendments. The second fight that we really want to start working on is, and have been working on, is reducing the federal land inventory. Now, I made a comment on, or ASL made a comment on Twitter earlier this week off of a post of somebody saying, had a picture of Washington State and all of the federal lands and saying, what part of this should be sold off? And so, I did a typical intellectual, factual post, and man, it created a firestorm. And I just want you to know that I did not know this until I read these posts, but evidently our organization has been funding the riots in LA. I didn't know that, but from the very informed Twitter crowd, where everybody gets their news, I learned great things, new things. But anyway, this is an issue where you have a huge divide in the public, and a lot of people on the conservative side who do not understand our issues. And so when they think we're reducing federal land inventory, they think you're taking away their hunting and fishing areas. And so it's going to be a big agenda, a big fight to push this through. But we have right now, you all know that the budget, the one big beautiful bill, is being negotiated on the Senate side now. It passed out of the House. The Senate's now negotiating it and adding to and from. On the House side, before they passed that bill, there was a provision in there to reduce the federal land inventory. Representative Zinke from Montana killed that. So it didn't make it in the House bill. On the Senate side, Chairman Lee, Senator Lee, has put that back in, but he has taken, there's only specific states it applies to, he's taken Montana out of it. So I think that was pretty smart because it kind of takes Zinke out of the fight on the House side. So anyway, that is back in the Senate bill. And so this is something that we're going to see as the negotiations are going on over the next couple weeks. We will see whether or not this stays in or not. But this is another place where you guys can lean in on this and help us, and contact your senator and tell him we want this. And if it makes it out of the Senate, then we need to be contacting the House members and telling them we want this. All right, the third one that I want to touch on that we are pushing, and we've been pushing for a lot of years, is to sunset conservation easements. And I want to spend just a moment on just talking about conservation easements and making sure everybody in the room understands why they are such an attack on private property. Conservation easements, they are that tool that you can use, you can put on your land. A land trust or a government can come out and offer you a conservation easement, and it's a contract, and then they own a portion of your land or your resources, and you own others. What you are selling when you sign up for a conservation easement are your development rights. Okay, so it's the development rights on your land. And what you're agreeing to is that you will never develop your land. And so your contract that you sign usually is pages and pages of restrictions. You can maybe, if you think to write it in, build one more house on that property, like if your kids want to come back and live there, but you have to write that into that contract. Anything you want to do in the future on your land, you have to write in that contract. And so when you look at the conservation easement contracts, you'll see that there's this whole section that applies to the landowner, the one who owns the land. And then there's a smaller section, usually not a very detailed section, which describes the land trust or the government's control over that property, what you are selling them. And so you're selling them the development rights for a conservation purpose. That's what gets you the tax deduction. And that conservation purpose then now controls your property. So if it's to conserve a species or a number of different things, whatever that conservation purpose is, that now controls your property. Now, some of these contracts are written to preserve agriculture, and that sounds really good, except that who's deciding what that agriculture should look like? It's not you. It's the land trust or the local government. That's the part that they control. So what we've told people is there's a number of reasons to be opposed to conservation easement. But probably number one, first off, these easements are signed in perpetuity. Okay? So when you're signing a contract and you're deciding how many houses will ever be built on that property, you are making that decision not only for your generation and your kids' generations and your grandchildren's generations, but 501,000, a million years from now if we last that long. It is in perpetuity. Now, you guys, I'm sure, are all very, very good ranch managers, but I don't think you can predict what your ranch is going to look like even in 20 years, 15 years. Your operation's going to change. But we think in signing these conservation easements that we can predict that 100 years out. Makes no sense. So that's one of the key problems. It's in perpetuity. Second thing that we like to make sure people understand is yes, you can sign that conservation easement. It is your property right. But once you do, it's no longer private property. And the reason is because you no longer control that land. The primary element of a property right is control. You can pay the taxes, you can hold the title, but if you don't control what happens on that land, you don't own it. And so remember that the control of the property is now controlled by the conservation purpose. That means everything on your property. And you don't control that anymore, the land trust or the government does. So it's no longer private property. That's concerning, and concerning because as we talked earlier about the ratio of private land to federal land today, or government held land today, 60% is private, 40 is federal, where we sit right, or government, where we sit right now. But a lot of that 60% is covered in conservation easements, which means there's a lot of private land that really is not private land. So it also doesn't protect from development. This is something a lot of times people will get into these because they think, okay, this is going to keep a power line from ever going across my land, or the city that's encroaching on my land, they can't develop it. And what people don't understand is any land can be condemned for a public purpose, period. Any land, conservation or easement land included. And that's happened over and over again. So that's kind of a big lie that's sold with that. And the third thing, and this was actually the one who mentioned this to me, which I thought she's absolutely right, as always, was Harriet. She said, you know, who enforces these conservation easements is not Fish and Wildlife Service or who holds the land trust. It's the IRS that gave you the tax deduction. And she's absolutely right. And there's plenty of examples of how that has gone awry as well. So on conservation easements, there's a couple really good things going on, and this is on this as well. Representative Hagman has a bill in Congress filed right today that would sunset conservation easements at the Department of Interior. So that's a really good first step. And I think her bill is for 20 years. We were talking about that last night, Julie. It's 20 years. Okay, so that's at the federal level. And this is on Representative Hagman's list of something she wants to get accomplished. And so this is another thing we need to get behind and support and get your members to sign on to her bill. The second thing that needs to be done is conservation easements can be sunset at the state level. So a state can decide we want to get rid of the in perpetuity, and we can limit them to 20 years, 30 years, 15 years, you know, whatever the state decides is appropriate for that state. And so Representative Ock, Julie, she is leading a bill right now at ALEC. If you guys know what ALEC is, the American Legislative Exchange Council, thank you. And that is the body of very conservative state representatives across the nation that gather and organize together, and they work on state proposals together. And so she is introducing at ALEC a bill that would sunset conservation easements, that then when it gets through the ALEC's process, then they send it out to all of their members, and then you have representatives in states all across the nation picking up that legislation and trying to get it passed into their state. So she's not only is she working on that here in South Dakota, but she's helping nationally to get this done. So we certainly appreciate her very valuable work on that. And that's something too that for all of you, that is something you can be doing at the state level. Let me mention on conservation easements a couple things that have come up recently. There is right now a committee in Congress is investigating the Nature Conservancy because they have ties to the CCP. And their concern that they're really looking at is a lot of conservation easements around our military bases are held by the Nature Conservancy. And so this is something that we have been concerned about for a long time, and now Congress is starting to dig into this. So this is something that we need to be watching to see what they come up, what they discover. The last time the Nature Conservancy was being investigated by Congress was when, I'm trying to remember, I think it was George Herbert Bush, or no, it was George Bush, was elected president. And Congress was really digging into the Nature Conservancy and all of their ties, and it was not looking pretty for the Nature Conservancy. And so what ended up happening is President Bush appointed the chairman of the Nature Conservancy, Paulson, as the Secretary of Treasury. And then the investigation went away. So hopefully we're not going to see something like that happen this time, but don't be surprised. They are a very big, worldwide, powerful organization that are involved in really everything you've heard talked about internationally, from Alex to Tracy, everything going on. They are deeply entrenched in it, and they're involved in the Muleshoe. They're the land trust that helped put this together. So they have a lot of interesting ties. All right, so I'm going to wrap up. You either gave me extra time or I came in under time. Either way, I'll take it. So let me ask you guys to please, if you're interested in the work that we're doing, you're not already a member, at least sign up for our email service, Liberty Matters. And you can, my beautiful daughter is with me. Stand up, Mackenzie. And she can take your name down or whatever you need to help get you signed up if you're not already. But this is, thank you. You can sit down now, Vanna. Very good job. I'm always pleased when she can travel with me. We have a lot of fun, and she's been such a joy to Dan and I all our lives. So we're really pleased she could come with us today. So anyway, sign up, stay tuned to what we're doing, and let me tell you, just thank you very much for all your support, for all your help. We have a lot of members in this room, and you guys are the ones that feed our work and make everything that we've done possible. And we wouldn't be doing this, we wouldn't be in this fight, we wouldn't be winning the battles that we've won without it. So thank you dearly. We were supposed to have a whole bunch of publications, which we pre-mailed to come in, and we learned this morning will be delivered Friday for you guys. So that's very convenient. But again, if you want to get a copy of our latest quarterly journal, which is Standing Ground, this is the cover, part of a representation of the cover, let Mackenzie know and we will get one mailed off to you. And then I want to leave you with this, which is something that my dad said that has always stuck with me. And if you guys have heard me speak before, you've heard this. And I hope you guys can recite it too. But this is the core of what we are fighting for. And Dad said, years ago when we were in the middle of our takings battle, as he was trying to understand why the environmentalists were coming after us so vehemently. And he said, either you have the right to own property or you are property. And that really is the reason this property rights battle is so important. So thank you all.